40 days down, 40,000 tips in, and a nation is still asking one question. Where is Nancy Guthrie, stolen from her desert home on February 1st, 2026, as an intruder dragged her into the darkness? Her family is not giving up. The FBI's investigation continues tirelessly, and today we return to that house to examine what was discovered inside what was left behind. It reveals a scene far more terrifying than the public has been led to believe. As the search passed the 40-day mark with no arrests and no named person of interest, and with no confirmed proof of life, a difficult question had to be asked. What is the true status of this case? Forget the official briefings and calming words. The actual answer lies in the public documents and investigator interviews. The image presented to the public by Sheriff Chris Nanos of the Pima County Sheriff's Department was one of cautious confidence. He assured the media in early March that his team was unquestionably nearer to a breakthrough than when the case began. He mentioned a substantial gathering of intelligence, the active development of leads, and that the probe had uncovered more than was publicly known. The FBI mirrored this sentiment. One former FBI special agent tracking the investigation for Newsweek labeled it a red-hot case, with up to 100 agents, analysts, and Pima County deputies pursuing to seize every viable tip. This description matters because when that agent says red hot, it isn't simple encouragement. It means the case is far from being cold. It signifies there are still active elements, and those elements could yield a breakthrough. The reward fund has also expanded dramatically. The Guthries themselves pledged $1 million payable solely for Nancy's safe return, while the FBI's reward is now $100,000, twice the first amount. Private donations have boosted the total reward to over $1.2 million, and the tip lines at 1-800-CALL-FBI are still open 24/7. To handle the massive amount of surveillance video, the FBI even moved its video analysis teams directly to Phoenix. A special FBI task force was created embedding 4 Pima County Sheriff's detectives and a sergeant full-time at the Tucson field office for this single investigation. However, the complete story of this investigation involves details conveniently omitted from all the press conferences. A $1.3 million civil suit has been brought against Sheriff Nanos and his Pima County Sheriff's Department. Former SWAT Commander Lieutenant Bob Kreider publicly stated that 98% of Nanos' own deputies cast a vote of no confidence in him. An association for Pima County deputies openly called the investigation an ego case, a label which Nanos firmly rejected. Collaboration between the FBI and the Sheriff's Department wasn't as smooth as early appearances indicated, and choices made during the first hours of the case. Choices Nanos now admits he regrets caused complications the investigation has struggled with ever since. The case does remain active. DNA analysis continues and the leads are genuine, but the journey from the case's beginning to its present state is paved with decisions that have baffled forensic specialists, former federal agents, and the general public, all asking one critical question: was this investigation handled correctly from the start? To interpret what this crime scene reveals, we must first know Nancy Guthrie and picture her daily existence within those walls. At 84 years old, she had resided in that Catalina Foothills house for over 50 years. It was the home where she raised her 3 children, Annie Cameron and Savannah. This was a quiet, cactus-dotted desert community nestled in the foothills, a place where people knew each other's rhythms, and serious crime was almost never a topic of discussion. Nancy's mobility was severely limited. According to Sheriff Nanos himself, she couldn't walk 50 yards alone, and a pacemaker kept her heart beating steadily. She also depended on daily heart medication her family called critical for her survival. Not a minor inconvenience or something she could skip for several days, but medicine that, if missed, would cause a rapid decline within 24 hours. Savannah Guthrie stated this clearly and publicly. Her mother was in constant pain and required that medicine just to stay alive. The night of January 31st, 2026, Nancy was at her daughter Annie's house about 4.5 miles away for dinner and cards. Her son-in-law Tommaso Chian took her home afterwards. Video surveillance from the home verified the garage door opening at roughly 9:48 p.m. and shutting at 9:50 p.m. He saw her go inside before the door closed, and he left. It was the final moment any family member would see Nancy Guthrie before she vanished. The next morning, a friend was waiting for Nancy to join their weekly church live stream, viewing a routine Nancy never missed. But she never showed up. Phone calls were not answered, so family rushed to the home, arriving close to 11 a.m. They checked the residence but found no trace of her. Near noon, they dialed 911. Deputies reached the scene at 12:15 that afternoon, and what they saw inside was the first silent clue to the unfolding mystery. Nancy's phone sat on the counter. Her wallet remained in its place, as did her vital daily heart pills, the medication a woman with her known heart condition could not afford to miss. They were sitting exactly where she kept them. The doorbell camera, usually mounted by the front door, had vanished, not smashed, not obscured, but gone. Then, as officers approached the main entrance, they discovered the evidence that would define this entire case. When Pima County Sheriff's deputies began processing that scene on February 1st, 2026, they came upon a house that had already declared its most vital story in dried blood on the porch, stretching from the front door towards the driveway. The first clue was the blood-perfect circular droplets that DNA testing would later confirm belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Yet before federal investigators could even reach that scene, and before the FBI could conduct a forensic sweep, the Sheriff's Department released the crime scene. The police tape was removed, and news crews, including one from Arizona's Family News, walked right to the door to film the blood droplets. The most crucial physical evidence in the disappearance of an 84-year-old woman was filmed by news teams long before it was seen by the FBI, but is sending by. When asked if he would have done things differently, Nano admitted it himself. Monday morning quarterback, absolutely, I probably could have held off on that. A retired police officer from Mesa called the release of the scene and the extensive public commentary the two biggest mistakes in the case's initial days. Michael Alcazar, a former NYPD detective at John Jay College, said investigators had probably dropped the ball a little bit by releasing the scene too soon. And Nanos, despite any defense of his department's thoroughness, conceded the point on the record that blood on the porch became the focus of the most intense forensic debate in the case. 3 different experts, all with experience in FBI investigations, criminal profiling, and forensic pathology, analyzed the bloodstains, providing public assessments, and they each uncovered a different part of the same awful picture. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell reviewed the bloodstain pattern speaking on a television program in early March. Her finding was very specific. She doubted Nancy had walked out of the house because of what was missing in the blood. When a person walks through blood droplets, their steps create gaps, which are breaks in the pattern, causing disruptions and irregular shapes where a foot has broken the fall. Those breaks were not present here. O'Connell's conclusion was that Nancy had been wrapped in something and was carried out of the house. The round shape of the droplets told her the blood fell straight down, not from someone who was moving, and she elaborated further. She thought Nancy was carried by 2 people based on a pattern suggesting her head was tilted with blood coming from her facial area. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Barton gave his own reading of the evidence in an interview with Fox News Digital. The quality of those drops with their pale centers that he called donut shapes was typical of blood mixed with air as it fell. That specific kind of mixing often points to bleeding from the nose or mouth. Barton's assessment was clear. Based on their shape number and placement on the porch, those were not innocent drops. He said they were entirely consistent with and indicative of occurring during an abduction. He added that the pattern suggested Nancy was unable to or did not attempt to stop the bleeding, which fit the theory that she was unconscious or not in control of her own body as she was moved across the porch. A retired FBI profiler, Jim Clemente, appearing on the same show as O'Connell, offered a different theory that is equally important. He agreed the drops fell straight down, matching the slow movement idea, but he disagreed that Nancy was fully wrapped. His logic was that if she were wrapped and still dripping blood, then the wrapping had to be incomplete, and his interpretation of the blood pattern suggested something far more defiant than unconsciousness. He believed that Nancy Guthrie fought back that something violent happened inside the house where she was hurt, and that the porch blood came from those injuries as she was taken out. In Clemente's view, the blood indicated she was probably still alive when she left the house, that someone was walking while bleeding, and that the pattern did not suggest a mortal wound or a dragging she was abducted. She was bleeding and likely conscious in those moments. 3 interpretations, 3 different theories, but all of them pointed to the same forensic beginning. Whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie started inside that home in the dark, during the 41 minutes between 1:47 in the morning, when the doorbell camera disconnected, and 2:28 in the morning, when her pacemaker lost its sync with her phone. The doorbell camera wasn't just disconnected, it was physically removed from the wall and stolen. The figure that appeared on that porch at 1:47 in the morning wore a full-face black ski mask, black gloves, light-colored pants, and a dark jacket, and had a 25-liter black Ozark Trail hiking pack on his back. He also had a holstered firearm strapped to his chest positioned for immediate access. He held a pen light between his teeth to keep his hands free, walked directly up to the camera and studied it, raised a gloved hand to block its lens, used plants from the garden to hide the view, and then ripped the entire device off the wall and took it. He took it because he knew hardware can hold data. He was right to be worried, but he was wrong to think taking it was enough. The FBI and Google engineers spent about 10 days excavating what forensic specialists call residual data. These are bits of information that live in cloud infrastructure even after a device is gone, and its files are marked for deletion. Jim Jones, director of George Mason University's Digital Forensics program, explained the principle for the public. Unplugging or removing a device from a wall will stop the recording. But whatever it already captured can still exist in the cloud in a temporary state before it is permanently erased. The FBI found what was in that temporary state. He thought the footage was wiped forever, but authorities recovered every single frame from that device. The video confirmed two vital pieces of information that would steer the entire investigation, starting with the man's detailed physical description on the porch. They saw his height, build gear, and the methodical way he operated, but a second set of photos showed someone there without the backpack or front-mounted holster. The Puma County Sheriff's Department handled this detail with extreme caution. Their official word was that no date or time was attached to those images, and any claim they were from different days was just pure guesswork. They refused to confirm a previous visit and actively pushed back against that theory. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer posed another idea. What if the person without the backpack wasn't the same man? It could have been an associate on the property that same night a second operative moving without the gear the main suspect was wearing. We know for certain detectives asked for camera footage from all neighbors in a 2-mile radius going back to January 1st, a whole month before the kidnapping. A search that broad and that far back is highly unusual. It implies they had cause to think someone was scoping out the area long before Nancy vanished. The pacemaker data narrowed that 41-minute window from the other side. At 2:12 in the morning, a separate camera on the property triggered a motion alert. There was no video since the subscription didn't cover recording, but it gave a hard timestamp confirming movement at that exact moment. Then at 2:28 a.m., the Bluetooth link between the Apple Watch and her phone severed. Bluetooth has a range of about 30 feet. When that connection broke, Nancy was no longer within 30 feet of her phone. She'd left it in the house, she was now outside. Perhaps in a car, she was simply gone. Her body's final digital footprint marked her exit at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. The medical implications of that specific time frame demand their own serious consideration. A sleep expert, Pat Byrne, analyzed this very scenario on a podcast and was blunt about the inherent dangers of what took place. An 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and known heart issues suddenly jolted from deep sleep around 2 a.m. by an intruder. That person or people present a documented cardiac threat completely separate from any direct physical harm they might inflict. Deep sleep fundamentally suppresses the body's normal cardiovascular functions. The sudden shock of waking up, fueled by terror, confusion, and being forced to move. Combined with the presence of strangers, it creates intense cardiac stress that can trigger severe medical events in elderly individuals. Byrne classified the danger as very high, pointing to the mix of the late hour, her age, the pacemaker, and the violent nature of her awakening. Her body could have been in a state of medical crisis from the very first second of those 41 minutes without anyone laying a hand on her. Detectives also examined the septic tank at the back of the house early on in their investigation. They were seen lifting the heavy cover and using long metal poles to search the contents of the underground container. Authorities never revealed what led them to that specific search, though veteran investigators say it is a standard step in a thorough crime scene analysis. It's a systematic process law enforcement uses to rule out every conceivable hiding spot for a person or for evidence on a property. The tank was checked. Whatever they did or did not find was never released in a way that altered the course of the case. The most crucial forensic evidence in this investigation wasn't found in the initial days. It emerged over weeks of meticulous analysis, and the most significant clues still have no clear answers. While reviewing the doorbell camera video, retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer spotted something the public discussion had completely missed. Tucked into the suspect's jacket pocket was a square-shaped object with an antenna sticking out from the top. Coffinder's professional opinion, which he shared online and in media interviews, was very precise. That was a walkie-talkie, not some Wi-Fi jammer or a cell phone, but a two-way radio. She noted that a jammer would have blocked the camera's signal and the pacemaker's connection. Neither signal was interrupted before the camera was physically taken down. That object was for communication, meaning someone was listening on the other end, and her conclusion was unwavering. He had help likely from more than one person. There was no way, she asserted, that one man could have pulled this off alone. The required teamwork to disable the camera, control the scene, and move an 84-year-old woman off a porch into a vehicle would take more than one person. That walkie-talkie proved the man on camera was communicating in real time with someone else who was completely out of view. Coffinder also pointed out how that radio explained a major dead end in the investigation. Geofencing, a technique used by police to track all mobile devices in a certain area at a specific time, had yielded absolutely no actionable intelligence. The reason why she claimed was right there in the video. People communicating with walkie-talkies don't ping cell towers. They leave no electronic footprint, showing they were smart enough to avoid using phones. Inside the home, investigators found DNA that didn't match Nancy Guthrie or anyone else who was known to have regular contact with her. Sheriff Nanos, in his public addresses, referred to this as evidence that was more critical than anything found at a distance from the property, more crucial than the gloves discovered 2 miles away, and more vital than the items found scattered through the desert. The DNA from inside the house was a ticking clock evidence from the 41 minutes the killer was present. But there was one huge problem. It was a mixed profile. It held genetic material from multiple people, not just one. Analyzing mixed DNA profiles is notoriously complex. The genetic signatures were hopelessly tangled and separating one person's data from the mixture required. Massive computational effort that could consume valuable time and still fail to yield a clean result for database comparison. Even Sheriff Nanos publicly confirmed the difficulty, stating the sample could be from several individuals and the lab faced serious technical hurdles. The decision of which lab was handling that crucial DNA became one of the most explosive points of contention. In the whole investigation after the FBI requested the gloves and samples be sent to its National Crime Lab in Quantico, Virginia, which is one of the most sophisticated forensic facilities in the entire world. Sheriff Nanos simply refused. His department instead mailed the evidence to a private Florida lab the county had long contracted with. A federal official speaking to Reuters said this choice risked bogging down a case that was growing more urgent by the second. An FBI source was far more direct with News Nation. They called the move dumb. They called it insane. They warned the Bureau would likely have to retest the evidence from the Florida lab, adding even more time to a desperate situation. The official also pointed to previous investigative setbacks, implying the lab issue was just another delay among many. Puma County had allegedly spent nearly $200,000 to send evidence to that same lab in Florida. Nanos defended his action by claiming he needed all the evidence consolidated in a single location. He wanted all DNA profiles and family markers in one system so the data could be accurately cross-checked. He strongly rejected any accusation that he was blocking the FBI from its work. He called the news coverage completely fabricated and the furthest thing from the truth, saying the FBI even agreed with his logic. Yet the story coming from FBI sources and various officials painted a very different picture. The blood evidence, the DNA from the glove, and the sample from the house were all in that Florida facility. The FBI did confirm that investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG, was being used on the DNA from the home's interior. IgG is the groundbreaking forensic tool that finally identified Joseph James DeAngelo, the infamous Golden State Killer. In 2018, after his DNA eluded database matches from crime scenes for over 40 years without a single hit. This method was successful because IgG doesn't need the suspect to actually be in any official database. All it requires is a relative who shares enough DNA markers to show a common ancestor on a public genealogy site. Specially trained genealogists then construct a family tree from that shared data, narrowing the search by geography. Then by age and physical description until they land on one person. DeAngelo was apprehended at his home in 2018 at age 72. Boo. He is now serving numerous life sentences without parole. That very same technique is now focused on the DNA from Nancy Guthrie's home. The process is active. Whether the controversial routing decision truly impacted the investigation's timeline in a major way has never been publicly clarified. But the FBI's official position was that using federal resources offered the most direct path to solving the case. And any deviation from that path only deepened the Guthrie family's anguish. The gloves found in the area added their own baffling twist. A set of black gloves found roughly 2 miles from the home seemed to be an exact visual match to those worn by the suspect on camera. DNA was taken from them and run through CODIS, which contains over 26 million genetic profiles. No match. The DNA was traced to a worker at a nearby restaurant with zero ties to the case, and that lead went cold. An unrelated discovery by a local couple of bloodied gloves and a rock about a mile from the home yielded initial DNA that didn't match the house samples. More gloves kept appearing at greater distances, with one found up to 10 miles away, all of which were undergoing tests. This strange trail of gloves made one retired FBI agent publicly comment that if the person was ditching gloves while fleeing, then investigators must ask what other items were discarded along that same escape route still out there waiting to be found. 3 weeks into the frantic search, a Fox News reporter named Michael Ruiz spotted a tampered-with utility box just around the corner from Nancy Guthrie's residence. The Pima County Sheriff's Department acknowledged the box was being examined. This discovery aligned with intelligence, FBI, and local investigators were gathering house to house. They were specifically asking residents if their internet went out overnight on February 1st. A neighbor mentioned to Brian Enton of News Nation that his Ring camera, specifically the one aimed closest to Nancy's home, had a not available record during the hours of the incident. His 3 other cameras at the house recorded just fine. He'd never received that particular error message before. The FBI was now looking into a possible internet blackout that occurred precisely during the time of the abduction. The theory of a Wi-Fi jammer was floated, but the very person suggesting it also pointed out its fatal flaw. A working jammer would have killed the Nest camera's feed and NY's pacemaker signal before any physical tampering occurred. That simply didn't happen. Officially, investigators haven't confirmed or dismissed any particular technique used to compromise the area's digital surveillance that evening. That utility box is still being examined, and a Ring camera roughly 2.5 miles away recorded an unknown vehicle around 2:36 a.m. on February 1st. This was just 8 minutes after NY's pacemaker stopped transmitting, and the FBI verified the vehicle as a point of interest, though it remains unidentified publicly. To manage the sheer quantity of local surveillance video, the FBI even moved analysis teams to Phoenix, where they sifted through footage of hundreds of thousands of cars. Getting a license plate provides a registered owner, which in turn creates a solid lead for detectives viewing the case with fresh eyes. It's a case that numerous experts with deep federal law enforcement backgrounds have scrutinized intensely. Some elements of the case just don't align, and while they don't indicate one conclusion, they certainly pile up to create questions the public files fail to address. The first major issue arose from events that transpired before the FBI had even fully joined the investigation. On February 2nd, just one day after Nancy's disappearance, Sheriff Nanos informed NBC News she was abducted directly from her own bed. A day later, he completely retracted those comments, admitting there was no proof for his assertions, and he couldn't confirm she was taken from her bed. He had no idea if she was even asleep at the moment the intruder made contact with her inside the house. These declarations, broadcast to the entire nation during a crucial early stage of the inquiry, were factually incorrect. It was during the same vital period that the crime scene was released, well before days had passed, or the FBI could perform its own thorough examination. The premises were opened up prior to federal agents gaining complete and unrestricted access. The press was already on the doorstep, blood was in plain sight, and a vital forensic area was compromised. The very location holding the most crucial physical clues in an abduction was unsecured before it could be fully processed, a misstep Nanos himself admitted. Colleagues from his own department echoed this admission, as did several retired investigators on the record, which leads to the evidence handling choice. DNA found in the home, the very evidence Nanos labeled as paramount, was dispatched to a private Florida lab instead of the FBI's own top facility in Quantico. This happened despite the Bureau's explicit request for the evidence, forcing the FBI to later recover it from the Florida facility. Insiders suggested they would probably need to re-examine the samples upon retrieval, a serious delay since Nancy Guthrie was 84 and needed her heart medication. The choice injected extra steps into the most urgent forensic part of the whole investigation, but Nanos' rationale for it never wavered. His reasoning was to consolidate all evidence and profiles in a single place to ensure proper cross-referencing, a position that seems logical at first glance. The FBI's counterpoint, communicated through various sources, was that their own resources and labs were the quickest route to finding the perpetrator. Both arguments are documented, and the friction they caused was called a major issue by high-ranking officials speaking publicly. A public contradiction also surfaced regarding how Nanos portrayed the investigation's current progress and direction. Nanos told NBC Nightly News late that February that no new individuals were being examined, yet Tucson businesses reported the FBI was showing them lists of names and photos then. The sheriff's public account stated one thing, while the FBI's actions on the ground seemed to tell a completely different story. This reportedly left investigators on the case unsure who was leading the charge, the sheriff or the FBI. And during that time, the United Cajun Navy stepped in, a volunteer group known for its involvement in high-profile missing person searches nationwide. They presented Nanos with a complete operational plan featuring search dogs and drones to cover the rough terrain near the Catalina foothills. The group's vice president publicly stated that Sheriff Nanos never even replied to their offer. So the same sheriff telling the press that progress was being made was ignoring a major offer of search help from a well-respected organization. Nanos later explained his refusal by citing fears that outside help would compromise the ongoing investigation. Critics sharply noted the crime scene itself was released to media on day one, making the contamination argument feel particularly hollow. A $1.3 million civil suit against Nanos and his department originated from an inmate at Puma County Jail named Christopher Michael Marks. Details of that lawsuit were never fully explained to the public, and a civil action against a sheriff in a major case isn't out of the ordinary. What was strange was the timing arriving amid a reported 98% no-confidence vote from his own deputies and accusations of making the case about his ego. It also came during a conflict with the FBI over evidence control that both agencies had to some degree acknowledged. Adding to the pressure, the sheriff himself admitted at a press conference that he wasn't accustomed to this level of public scrutiny. Even with his decades of experience, none of this proves any criminal acts, nor has it been shown to have directly damaged the investigation. However, in trying to grasp what the investigation produced or failed to produce after more than 40 days, the journey from the night Nancy vanished to the present day is paved with every single one of these choices. And every one of those choices came at a steep price, be it lost time or squandered forensic chances. The search for Nancy was immediately crippled by a total breakdown in interagency trust, forcing those trying to bring her home to work around the system, because 2 days after she vanished, the first ransom note arrived at KOLB News. It came through the station's online portal in Tucson, then a second hit the same outlet, and another was sent to TMZ. By the time investigators had pieced together all the messages, no fewer than 3 separate media groups had received what looked like copies of the exact same demand. The note called for millions of dollars in Bitcoin, setting 2 escalating deadlines, and stating that Nancy was unharmed, but terrified. It also made a chilling declaration that all communication would be one-way and would cease after the terms had been delivered. The message explicitly stated there would be no channel for the family to contact the sender. Their only option was to wait. That particular detail, the deliberate severing of any possible back and forth, is itself a highly calculated decision, not how a nervous, impulsive person acts. It's how someone communicates when they've meticulously planned for every single avenue an investigator might use to find them. The FBI special agent in charge of the Phoenix office, Hythe Janik, later confirmed that 2 specific details in that note were not public knowledge at the time. The first was a direct reference to Nancy's Apple Watch, including its precise location within the house. The second mentioned a floodlight at the home, describing it as broken. Fox News drone footage would later confirm 2 shattered floodlights dangling by their wires in the backyard, completely hidden from any public view. The placement of that Apple Watch inside the home was, as the FBI confirmed, a detail that was not available from any public source. Law enforcement sources reported that both of these details led them to believe the note was legitimate and from someone with direct knowledge of that house. TMZ's founder, Harvey Levin, who read one of the notes himself, described it as carefully written, grammatically flawless, structured, and layered. He said that the detail about the Apple Watch's location was exactly the kind of thing that would force the FBI to take the note seriously from the start. From KOLD anchor, Mary Coleman, who received the very first note at her station, said it had information that only Nancy's captor could possibly know. Things that only people who were there at the moment she was taken would know. Meanwhile, Derek Culla, a 42-year-old man from California, was arrested on February 5th for something else entirely. Culla sent texts directly to Nancy's husband, not to the media demanding Bitcoin, and using a VoIP number to conceal his location. The FBI managed to trace that number back to a Gmail account registered to Culla and discovered the texts were sent from his Los Angeles home. He was charged with sending a ransom demand over state lines and using telecommunication devices to threaten and harass. That message was immediately identified by the FBI as a fraudulent ransom attempt entirely separate from the notes sent to the media. The FBI was crystal clear that he had no link to the abduction, but his arrest meant that every single communication from that point on had to be verified. This added a new layer of difficulty to a negotiation process that was already racing against an impossible clock. The note containing the Apple Watch detail gave 2 deadlines. The first was 5 p.m. on Thursday, February 5th. The family stated publicly that they were ready to pay, and Savannah Guthrie, in a video made with FBI negotiators, spoke directly to her mother's captor. Cameron Guthrie also made his own plea on video as the first deadline loomed, but the $6 million deadline came and went. And whoever wrote those notes, the person with inside knowledge of a broken floodlight and the exact location of an Apple Watch, never contacted them again. There was no proof of life, no new instructions, and no reply to any of the family's appeals. The silence was instantaneous and total. Sheriff Nanos himself, in a surprisingly frank interview with the Daily Mail, admitted that the motive for the crime was where he kept getting stuck. He wondered aloud if the ransom was ever real, or if it was just a smokescreen for something far more personal. He said it in his own words, "Is it really for money, or is it for revenge for something?" That single question spoken on the record to a reporter by the man leading the entire investigation has no public answer. But it highlights the same contradiction that the silence after the ransom deadline does the notes knew things they shouldn't have known. The deadline passed without any of the follow-up you would expect from someone who genuinely wanted to trade Nancy for money. Whatever the true reason for this crime was, the public record of it doesn't fit the profile of a simple kidnapping for ransom. And that massive gap between the crime's precision and the silence after the demand is one of the biggest unresolved questions in this entire case. What the evidence gathered in this investigation tells anyone who looks closely is that this was in no way random. The pen light clenched between his teeth as his hands moved methodically over the camera meant he had done this before or had practiced in detail. The walkie-talkie in his pocket suggested a partner was listening, and the ransom note's inside knowledge proved the person responsible knew that property intimately. That's knowledge you don't get from just passing a house on the street. The blood on the porch told a story of a woman being moved, not walking. The 41-minute window framed by a camera going dark and a pacemaker signal vanishing told a story of something planned and executed with ruthless speed. The man who wore that jacket has been seen by more people than almost any other person in the modern history of American missing persons cases. The footage is absolutely everywhere. The images are in every major news outlet and across every social media platform in the entire English-speaking world. English-speaking world. The suspect walked onto that porch with his own face hidden by a mask. Yes, but in front of a camera that recorded his height, and his build. It captured how he moved the equipment he had and the systematic calm he displayed. Someone who knows him has seen that video. Someone knows that jacket, those pale pants, and the precise way that figure leans in a doorway because they have witnessed it themselves. Coffiner laid it out perfectly. The absolute best chance of solving this case is for someone who knows the suspect to speak up. Not because the evidence won't eventually point the way, because it almost certainly will. But the most direct line between the current investigation and a suspect in cuffs is a person, not a science lab. That path is paved by a talk that is being avoided right now, a tip that has yet to be shared. It all comes down to a choice that must be made by the person currently withholding what they know. Out there right now is an individual who understands exactly what unfolded in those 41 minutes, who was on that radio, and who drove that car. The one filmed by a Ring camera at 2:36 a.m. 2.5 miles away, and who was the lookout while it happened. Someone approached an 84-year-old woman's front door with a pen light in his teeth, following a plan he had scouted on the property at least one time before. The phone lines are active, the FBI can be reached at 1-800-CALL-FBI, and tips are accepted online at tips.fbi.gov. You can reach the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351490. All information you provide is kept completely confidential. The reward for details leading to NY's return or the conviction of those responsible is now more than $1.2 million. If this investigation has captured your attention, and if you want to be here for the final breakthrough when the arrest happens and the mask is removed, when the true story of the events in the Catalina foothills on the morning of February 1st is at last revealed, subscribe to this channel and activate your notifications because this case is still developing and the story is not finished. In life, we often rush forward without pausing to truly see what matters. Yet the most powerful lessons are not found in grand achievements, but in quiet moments of awareness, kindness, and understanding. The story reminds us that every action, no matter how small, carries weight. A single word can uplift or wound. A simple choice can shape a future. We live in a world where distractions are constant, but meaning comes from intention. When we choose empathy over judgment, patience over anger, and courage over fear, we begin to transform not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us. Growth is not about perfection. It is about reflection. It is about recognizing our mistakes and choosing to become better step by step. True strength lies in compassion and the willingness to listen, and in the courage to care when it's easier not to. Let this be a reminder you have the power to create impact. Your voice, your actions, your presence. They matter more than you think. And sometimes the smallest change in perspective can lead to the greatest change in the world.